A werewolf romance audiobook. Hello, friends. This story is about Princess Lira, a royal exile forced to serve as a slave in the enemy's castle, the very pack that destroyed her family. Her mission is to survive and, eventually, seek vengeance against the man who rules the land, Alpha Cassian. She knows she must remain invisible, but her life changes forever when she is dragged before the Alpha, and their eyes lock, igniting a terrifying, powerful, and undeniable connection. The laughter hit her first. It was a vicious sound, high-pitched and splintered, cutting through the dull throb of her wounds. Iron manacles, rough and heavy, dug into the already raw skin of her forearms. Each pulse sent a spike of agony through her whole, battered frame. Lira tried to stand tall. She tried to project defiance, but her knees buckled slightly. The floor of the great throne room was polished obsidian, so slick and cold it felt like the very breath of winter beneath her bare, bloodied feet. The contrast of the room's dazzling opulence with the grime and rags that clung to her only amplified the court's mocking sneers. They called her vermin. They called her spoil of war. They called her the last ghost. And deep down, she knew they were right. She was a shadow in rags, dragged before the Alpha Cassian, the king of the conquering pack, the pack that had helped turn her entire life to ash. Her immediate goal was simple: survive. Stay hidden. Remain unseen. But a deeper, darker, more rebellious part of her demanded a glimpse of him. She needed to look into the eyes of the man who presided over this gilded cage of vipers. So, she slowly lifted her head. The vast hall was a dizzying blur of costly silk banners and arrogant, watching faces, but her gaze found him instantly, as if pulled by a rope. Her vision narrowed, locking onto the imposing, black stone throne. He wasn't the monster she'd imagined. Not a scarred, graying tyrant, but a man carved from dark granite. His hair was the shade of midnight, falling across a severe brow, and his jawline was so sharp it seemed capable of slicing through marble. He was cloaked in black, a stark, formidable shadow against the golden-laid stone of the throne. And he wasn't joining the mockery. In fact, his face was a study in profound, almost aggressive boredom. But then his eyes snared hers. In that single, drawn-out moment, the entire world compressed to the space between them. The howling jeers of the pack court faded to a distant, meaningless hum. His eyes weren't black like his clothing. No, they were a strange, liquid molten gold, like a jungle predator's gaze caught and held in firelight. Time seemed to stop. Her breath hitched, catching painfully in her throat. Something deep inside her, something ancient and fiercely wild that she thought had died forever with her family, suddenly stirred. It was terrifying. She couldn't tell what scared her more: the blatant, searing hatred radiating from the court, or the sudden, shocking, laser-like focus in the Alpha's golden stare. His indifference shattered, completely. His entire posture changed, a subtle tightening of the shoulders, a sudden, sharp intake of breath. A flicker of something, surprise, then anger, then a raw, blinding possession, flared in those depths. The air grew thick and heavy, and the space separating them burned with an awareness so intense she could practically taste it, like the metallic scent of lightning about to strike. Before she could move, before she could even process the sudden, violent shift, his voice cut across the hall. It wasn't a roar of fury. It was a low, quiet, utterly absolute command that carried more sheer power than any shout. Enough. Silence. It landed like a physical blow, crushing the laughter and the rising tide of whispers. Every head in the hall snapped to face him. His golden gaze, however, never left hers. Her heart seized in her chest. The moment stretched thin and tight, and she felt utterly pinned by his scrutiny, like a rare insect under glass. He was seeing her, not the filthy rags, not the dried blood, but something much deeper. Something he recognized. And she let it happen. Because in his eyes, she wasn't invisible anymore. She was a threat. Another day, another soul-numbing parade of fawning supplicants and political petitioners. Cassian sat on his throne, his boredom a suffocating weight. He listened to the endless, droning voices of his council, the petty rivalries of his nobles, and the fawning, hollow praise that meant less than nothing to him. His wolf paced with restless irritation inside him, snarling at the sheer weakness inherent in the political theater. True power wasn't this gilded chair. It was raw strength. It was absolute control. And right now, he felt a distinct lack of both, feeling trapped within a cage of his own making. Then they dragged her in. He barely flicked his gaze up at first, just another piece of the spoils from a recent border skirmish, bloody, battered, and draped in tattered cloths. The usual collection of nobles immediately began their cruel chorus of laughter, led by that preening, ambitious noblewoman, Lady Seraphina. He was just about to dismiss the wretch to the deepest dungeons and move on with the tedious business of ruling. But then she looked up. Her gaze struck him like a physical punch to the gut. His wolf immediately slammed against his ribs, a raw, deep, primal snarl ripping through his mind.
Mine.
The single word was an earthquake. It shook the foundations of his ironclad control. A primal, shocking instinct so overwhelming it instantly stole the air from his lungs. His mask of bored indifference evaporated, instantly replaced by a shocking, infuriating wave of possession. Her eyes, they weren't broken. They weren't pleading for mercy. They were full of the shimmer of shattered stars and a fierce, unquenchable fire. A defiance that burned straight through his emotional defenses.
Who is she?
Who was this nameless, filthy slave who dared to look at him, the Alpha, as if they were equals? Without conscious thought, his voice cracked through the charged air. Enough. The silence that followed was his domain, his power made manifest. Yet his heart hammered violently against his ribs. He physically could not look away from her. He saw the flicker of shock in her eyes, the painful hitch of her breath. She saw it, too. This sudden, violent, illogical recognition, this connection that had no rational basis. It was a monumental weakness, a dangerous distraction. His father had been ruled by whims and whispers, a softness that nearly cost them the pack. Cassian would not be his father. He would not be ruled by a stray, fiery pup with fire in her gaze. He had to be strong. He had to be ruthless. He had to get her out of his sight. With a sharp, decisive flick of his wrist, he signaled the nearest guards. Take her to the dungeons. His voice was pure ice, betraying none of the inferno raging inside him. He watched them drag her away, her head held stubbornly high, and the image of her face, of those fiercely defiant eyes, was burned indelibly into his mind. Even so, he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that simply sending her away wouldn't be nearly enough. The moment their eyes locked, something had cracked open, and he had a terrifying feeling it would never be sealed shut again. The utter darkness of the dungeon was almost a relief. Down here, the air was heavy with the honest scent of damp stone and pervasive despair, a familiar, brutal perfume. At least it was honest. There were no false smiles, no glittering jewels hiding rotten souls, only cold, hard reality. As her eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom, Lira slid down the rough wall, the stone scraping painfully against her back. Her body ached, a deep, constant, throbbing pain that was a permanent reminder of her new, low station in life. Truth be told, the physical pain was nothing compared to the turmoil in her mind. His eyes. Those shocking golden eyes. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase the memory of his intense stare. It wasn't just the shock of the connection she had felt. It was the danger. To be invisible was to be safe. But he had seen her, which meant she was safe no longer. Moments later, the heavy tread of guards echoed down the corridor toward her cell. Her instincts surged immediately. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, attempting to make herself impossibly small. Don't know what it was, a gruff voice muttered nearby. Never seen the Alpha look like that. He was ready to tear someone's throat out. It was the girl, a second voice replied softly. Quiet, the council is already whispering. They say he's losing his grip, getting distracted. Serafina's father is actively pushing for a marriage alliance, to stabilize him. The voices faded away, but the words hung in the stale air like poison gas. So, the Alpha was on a short leash, held captive by his own counsel, just like her father had been. A memory, sharp and painful, pierced through her grief. Her father, laughing softly as he taught her how to read a battle map spread on the floor of his study. A leader's greatest weapon isn't her claws, my little wolf, he had told her, his voice warm and full of boundless love. It's her mind. Never let them cage your mind. Her chest ached with the profound sense of loss. The council had caged her father's mind with their lies and endless betrayals, long before they finally ordered his death. And now they were attempting to do the exact same thing to Cassian. The thought should have brought her deep satisfaction. Instead, for some reason she couldn't explain, it left a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. She was here for vengeance, not pity. What was worse, a tiny, treacherous part of her wondered what it would be like if those golden eyes looked at her not with anger or possession, but with the same warmth her father once had. She crushed the thought instantly. It was a weakness she absolutely could not afford. Because deep down she knew the unvarnished truth. He was her enemy. He was her target. He was the key to her revenge. And he had just made her his focus. The fire crackled in the massive hearth, casting dancing, restless shadows across the maps and scrolls that littered his study. But the physical warmth of the flames couldn't touch the cold, raw restlessness deep in his bones. He poured a heavy glass of amber liquid, the sharp, familiar scent doing nothing to calm the wolf snarling restlessly in his mind. Her. The girl. He couldn't get her out of his head. It was utterly infuriating. He was the Alpha. He commanded armies, held the lives of thousands in his hands, and yet the defiant gaze of one nameless slave had thrown his entire world off its axis.
Why?
Was it her courage? Was it the flicker of a noble spirit he saw hidden beneath the grime and filth? Or was it something else? Something deeper? Something his blood recognized even if his rational mind refused to? He paced the length of the room, a magnificent, caged predator. His father's ghost haunted these chambers, a weak Alpha manipulated by his council, who put his trust in the wrong people. Cassian had sworn he would be different. He would be stone. He would be iron. He would trust no one but himself. And yet this girl felt different. The council already saw it. He'd felt their probing eyes on him in the hall. They saw his momentary lapse in control as a crack in his armor, a weakness to be ruthlessly exploited. Lord Valerius, Serafina's father, was the worst of them, always whispering about tradition, about duty, about the need for a politically advantageous mate to secure his line. As if a mate was merely another piece on a game board. Maybe she was fate. Or maybe she was a trap. He stopped in front of the fire, staring intently into the flames. To make things worse, his wolf wouldn't settle. It kept pushing at him, a constant, primal pressure demanding he go to her. Claim her. Protect her. Protect her from what? The dungeons? From his own people? What was she? A threat, a temptation. A test from the moon goddess herself? He didn't know. And the not knowing was like a poison in his veins. In that moment, he knew he couldn't leave her in the dungeons. Not only that, he couldn't leave her to simply fade into the ranks of the palace servants. It was too dangerous. He needed her close. He needed to watch her, to understand her, to unravel the mystery that was currently tearing his self-control to shreds. It was a massive risk. But because of that, it was the only path forward. He strode to his desk, his decision now made. There was only one way to solve a puzzle. You bring it into the light. He summoned his head of household, a stern older wolf named Gryph. The new slave, Cassian said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The one from the borderlands. Have her cleaned. Bring her to my wing. She will work directly for me. Gryph's eyes widened fractionally before his face settled back into a neutral mask. Alpha. You have your orders. Cassian bit out, the growl in his voice barely contained. As the old wolf bowed and left, Cassian turned back to the window, looking out over the moonlit courtyard. He had just brought the fire directly into his house. He didn't know if he was going to control it, or if they were all about to burn. The order came without warning. Rough, impersonal hands pulled her from the damp straw of her cell. Her body coiled tight with fear, braced for a beating or worse. But then something impossible happened. Instead of the whipping post, they dragged her towards the baths. Hot water, a shock so profound it felt like a brand, hit her skin, scrubbing away layers of grime and dried blood. A strange, coarse but clean tunic was shoved into her hands. It was all happening so fast her thoughts spun, a whirlwind of confusion and raw terror. What game was this? Soon, she found herself standing in a place she never imagined she'd see again, the Alpha's private chambers. The air here was utterly different from the rest of the keep. It smelled of old leather, with smoke and something else, something wild and clean, like pine needles after a winter storm. It was his scent. It was everywhere, and it made the hairs on her arms stand up. The room was vast, dominated by a massive stone hearth and shelves overflowing with books and scrolls. It wasn't opulent like the throne room. Rather, it was a space of quiet, formidable power. And there he was. Cassian stood by the window, a towering silhouette against the moonlight, his back to her. He was bigger than she remembered, his shoulders filling the frame. For a long, agonizing moment, he didn't speak. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, and with every heartbeat, her fear grew. Maybe this was a new kind of torture, a way to show her everything she could never have before he snuffed her out. Then he turned. The moment their eyes locked, the air crackled again. His golden gaze swept over her, intense and assessing, and she felt a strange, hot flush creep up her neck. She didn't know what scared her more, his anger in the throne room or this quiet, calculating scrutiny. "You will work here now," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. She said nothing. She couldn't. Her tongue felt thick, useless. He took a single step closer, and her body moved on pure instinct, a tiny, flinching retreat. A muscle in his jaw tightened. "Your duties are simple. You will obey. You will clean these rooms. You will serve my meals. And you will not speak unless spoken to. Do you understand?" She gave a single, jerky nod. "Good," he said, though he didn't sound pleased. His eyes lingered on her for a second longer, a strange conflict swirling in their depths. She saw a flicker of something, a hint of the same wild energy she'd felt in the throne room, but it was quickly masked. Deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't a reprieve. This was the center of the storm, and she had just been chained to the lightning rod. The days that followed were a blur of nervous tension. Lira learned the geography of the Alpha's wing, a world of silent corridors and heavy wooden doors. Her goal was simple: to be a shadow, to perform her tasks so perfectly she would blend seamlessly into the background. She fetched his meals, cleaned his study, and stoked his fire, all while keeping her eyes down and her mouth shut. It was a new kind of prison, a gilded cage, where the bars were made of fear and constant, heavy observation. She was carrying a tray of bread and cheese for his midday meal, her focus entirely on not spilling a single crumb, when a voice like poison honey stopped her dead in her tracks. "Well, well. Look what the Alpha dragged in." Lira froze. Standing before her, flanked by two other noblewomen, was the same woman from the throne room, Lady Seraphina. She was stunningly beautiful, with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of a winter sky. And she was looking at Lira as if she were something scraped off the bottom of a boot. "I must say, I'm surprised it can walk on two legs," Seraphina continued, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "And to think it's allowed to handle the Alpha's food. Do be more careful, little rat. We wouldn't want you dirtying his plate." Lyra's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She tried to step around them. Without warning, a foot darted out. Silver clattered. A searing heat splashed across her hand and arm as the tray and its contents went flying. The women laughed as she crumpled to the floor amidst the scattered food. Pain, sharp and stinging, flared from her hand, but it was nothing compared to the hot wave of humiliation that washed over her. She kept her eyes on the mess, refusing to look at them, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her tears. Her world narrowed to the spilled cheese and the spreading stain on the stone runner. In the span of a breath, she heard another set of footsteps, heavier, more deliberate. The laughter died instantly. She didn't have to look up to know who it was. The air itself had changed, growing heavy and charged. His scent, pine and winter, cut through the oppressive air. He was walking from the strategy room when he heard the laughter. It was Seraphina's, a sound he had come to associate with cruelty. Then he heard the clatter of a tray and rounded the corner. The sight that greeted him sent a bolt of ice-cold fury straight through his veins. She was on the floor, his girl on her hands and knees, surrounded by a mess, her shoulders trembling slightly, and Seraphina stood over her, a smug, triumphant smirk on her face. In that moment, Cassian didn't see a political rival or the daughter of an important councilman. He saw a predator who had dared to harm his mate. The word echoed in his mind, fierce and undeniable this time. His wolf clawed at the surface, a low, guttural growl building in his throat that he barely contained. "Seraphina," he said. His voice was dangerously quiet. She spun around, her smirk instantly vanishing, replaced by a mask of innocent surprise. "Alpha, we were just... I know what you were doing." He cut her off, his golden eyes like chips of ice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The sheer force of his authority pressed down on them, and the other two girls shrank back. His gaze fell to the red, angry burn on the back of Lira's hand. To make things worse, he felt a vicious, protective rage, so powerful it almost buckled his knees. He looked back at Seraphina, letting the full weight of his displeasure fall upon her. "This is my wing. The servants here are under my direct protection. If you ever lay a hand on one of them again, you will find that your father's position on the council will not be enough to protect you from my displeasure. Am I clear?" She paled, her blue eyes wide with shock and a hint of fear. She had never been spoken to this way. She gave a stiff, jerky nod. "Get out of my sight," he commanded. She and her friends practically scrambled over each other to obey. He waited until their footsteps faded before he moved. He crouched down, his movements slow, deliberate, as if approaching a frightened animal. She still wouldn't look at him. "Let me see your hand," he said, his voice softer now. She flinched, but didn't pull away as he gently took her hand in his. The skin was red and already starting to blister. He felt the tremor that ran through her. She was not just hurt, she was terrified. And he, the Alpha who was supposed to be her ultimate fear, was the one offering comfort. What followed was a moment of pure, unguarded connection. He looked at her bowed head, at the fierceness in her refusal to show weakness, and he knew. He knew he would tear down the world to keep her safe. That night, she sat on her cot in the small alcove designated for her, nursing her bandaged hand. Gryph, the stern head of household, had tended to the burn with a surprising gentleness, but he hadn't spoken a word. The entire keep seemed to be holding its breath. The story of what happened in the hallway had surely spread like wildfire. She should have been terrified. Instead, she just felt confused. He had defended her. He had protected her. He had looked at Seraphina as if he was going to kill her. It didn't make sense. Why would an Alpha risk a political incident for a nameless slave? It was a question that circled her mind over and over with no answer. Before she could move, a shadow fell over her doorway. It was him, Cassian. He held a small wooden cup. Her heart leaped into her throat. Her body tensed, ready to bolt. "This will help with the pain," he said, his voice a low murmur. He didn't enter her space, but offered the cup to her. "It is ginger and willow bark. Drink it." Her hand trembled as she took it. The cup was warm. As her fingers brushed against his, a jolt, like a tiny spark of lightning, shot up her arm. Her breath caught. She quickly pulled her hand back, cradling the cup. "Why?" The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. A small, choked whisper. He was silent for a long moment, his golden eyes searching her face in the dim light. "Because what Serafina did was an insult to me," he finally said, though his eyes told a different story. "Now drink." She obeyed, sipping the warm, bitter tea. As the silence stretched between them, the air grew thick with unspoken things. She felt like they were standing on a cliff edge, and one wrong word could send them both tumbling into the abyss. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice soft but insistent. The question she had been dreading. The space between them burned. Her name was her past. It was her family. It was the only thing they hadn't taken from her. To give it to him felt like the ultimate surrender. Her goal was survival, and her name was her last shield. She looked down at the cup in her hands. "I have no name," she whispered to the floor. "Look at me," he commanded. And, despite herself, she did. "Everyone has a name." "My name died with my family," she said. And the raw truth of the words surprised her. A piece of her carefully constructed wall cracked. "My name died with my family." Her words hit him harder than any physical blow. The raw, aching grief in her voice was real. It was a glimpse behind the curtain of defiance, a look into the wounded soul she tried so hard to hide. And it made him want to crush whoever had put that pain in her eyes. His goal had been simple: learn her name, get a piece of the puzzle. But now it was so much more. He wanted to know her. He wanted to know the family she mourned, the life she'd lost, the story behind the faint scar on her temple. "They can't take your name unless you let them," he said softly, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't identify. "It is yours. The only thing that truly is." She just looked at him, her eyes wide and dark in the flickering torchlight. In them, he saw a strength that humbled him.
She would not bend.
She would not break. She would not give him the one thing she had left. He was the Alpha. He could have commanded her. He could have forced it from her. He could have threatened her with pain until she told him everything. But then, what would he have learned? Nothing. He would have broken her spirit, the very thing that drew him to her. Instead, he gave a slow nod, a retreat, a concession. "Then for now," he said, the words tasting strange in his mouth, "you will rest and you will heal." He turned and walked away without another word, the echo of her quiet defiance following him down the hall. The battle was over for tonight, but the war had just begun. He hadn't gotten her name, but he had gotten something far more important: a reason to fight. A strange, fragile peace settled in the days that followed. It wasn't safety. Not really. It was more like the dead calm in the eye of a hurricane. Lira moved through her duties in the Alpha's wing, a silent ghost. Her goal was to be unremarkable. Yet, she felt the heavy weight of his eyes on her constantly. He rarely spoke to her, but his presence was a heavy cloak she could never shrug off. Because of that, she started watching him, too. Her duties often required her to be a silent presence in his study while he met with his council. From the shadows she watched them. Lord Valerius, Serafina's father, with his clever, cold eyes. The other elders, wolves who smiled with their mouths, but not with their hearts. They spoke of loyalty and the good of the pack, but their words were cages. Each one meant to limit his power, to bend him to their will. It was so familiar, it made her stomach churn. It was just like with her father. A memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp, her father looking tired, rubbing his temples after a long meeting with his own council. "They want a king," he'd told her quietly. "But they will only accept a puppet." As she watched Lord Valerius flatter Cassian while subtly questioning his judgment, she felt an emotion she didn't expect, a cold, protective anger. These were the same kinds of wolves who had devoured her family. And now they were circling their own Alpha. For the first time, she saw him not as a monster, but as a man standing alone against a rising tide. Without thinking, her gaze flickered to him, a silent warning. He was already looking at her. The moment their eyes locked, something passed between them, an understanding, an acknowledgement of the vipers in the room. Lord Valerius noticed the exchange. His lips thinned into a sneer. "Alpha, if the slave's presence is a distraction." Cassian's response was instant and deadly. He sat at the head of the table, a king in his own court, feeling like a prisoner. The council droned on, their words a web of politics and veiled threats. He had to listen. He had to play the game. But his wolf clawed at his insides, wanting to tear out their throats for their insolence. More importantly, he was acutely aware of her. She was by the hearth, stacking firewood, but her presence was a steady, quiet anchor in the turbulent room. He felt her eyes on him and looked up. For a heartbeat, he saw past her fear. He saw a warrior's appraisal, a flicker of warning. She saw the trap they were laying for him. She understood. How could a slave understand the intricacies of pack politics? The question was a constant, nagging puzzle in the back of his mind. Then Valerius spoke, his voice dripping with disdain as he gestured toward her. That was the mistake, the final straw. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Cassian leaned forward, his hands flat on the oak table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Watch your tongue, Valerius," he said, his voice a low, chilling growl that promised violence. The firelight glinted in his golden eyes. "Or I'll have it removed." Valerius paled. The other elders shifted uncomfortably. "She is under my protection," Cassian continued, his gaze sweeping over every single one of them, a silent threat to each wolf at the table. "That means she is an extension of my will. To insult her is to insult me. You will remember that." He let the words hang in the dead silence. The meeting was over. He dismissed them with a sharp gesture. They filed out, their eyes full of resentment and newfound fear. Valerius was the last to leave, and as he passed Lira, he gave her a look of pure, unadulterated hatred.
Cassian saw it.
He saw the way she flinched ever so slightly. In that moment, he knew he had done more than just defend a servant. He had chosen a side in a war that had not yet been declared. And she, the silent girl with the ghost of a warrior in her eyes, was standing right in the middle of it with him. The study was quiet now, the air still thick with the lingering tension of the council meeting. Lira moved through the room, her hands trembling slightly as she collected the empty goblets. Cassian stood by the fire, his back to her, but she could feel the coiled energy coming off him in waves.
He was a storm held in check.
Her gaze fell upon the large table in the center of the room. A massive map of the territories was spread across it, dotted with carved wooden markers representing pack patrols and rival borders. And she saw it, a flaw, a weakness in the patrol route along the southern ridge. It was a classic pincer trap formation, leaving the patrol completely exposed to an ambush from the canyons below. It was the exact mistake a rival pack had made against her father's warriors years ago. He'd taught her how to spot it himself. Her hand moved before she could think. A mistake. A terrible mistake. Her fingers darted out, nudging the small wooden wolf marker a few inches to the west, covering the blind spot. The second she did it, a bolt of pure panic shot through her. "What have you done?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. Slaves didn't know strategy. Slaves didn't correct an Alpha's battle plans. This was a death sentence. She quickly snatched her hand back, her fingers moving to shove the marker back to its original flawed position. "Leave it." His voice, low and dangerously close, made her freeze, her blood turned to ice. She hadn't even heard him move. She looked up, and he was there, standing on the other side of the table, his golden eyes fixed not on her but on the map. On the marker she had moved. The silence roared. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. He walked slowly around the table until he was standing beside her, his presence a suffocating wave of heat and power. He stared down at the map, his expression unreadable. "This new position," he said, his voice a quiet rumble. "It protects the patrol from the canyon pass. It forces any attacker onto the open ridge into a bottleneck." He looked at her, his eyes boring into hers. "It is a perfect countermove."
Her throat was dry.
She couldn't speak. She could only stare back, trapped. He had watched her from the fireplace. He'd seen her pause by the map, seen the flicker of recognition in her eyes, and then he'd seen her hand move with a swift, practiced certainty that spoke of years of training. His mind was reeling. This wasn't a guess. It wasn't a lucky chance. That move was the work of someone who had studied strategy, who understood the flow of a battle. A common slave, even a clever one, would never have seen it. But the daughter of an alpha, the heir to a pack, she would have been trained in these arts from the moment she could walk. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture he wasn't yet ready to see. The defiance, the hidden strength, the grief when she spoke of her family. It was all starting to make a terrible, dangerous kind of sense. He had to know. He leaned closer, deliberately invading her space, breathing in the scent of her fear. It mingled with that other scent, the one of rain and herbs, and it was intoxicating. He kept his voice low, a soft, dangerous weapon. A simple slave wouldn't see that. A kitchen girl wouldn't understand a pincer trap. He watched her pupils dilate. He saw the frantic beating of the pulse in her throat. She was a cornered animal, searching for an escape that didn't exist. With every heartbeat, the tension grew. He had her. He had a piece of her secret, and he wasn't letting go. He lowered his voice to a near whisper, a question that was more of a demand. "Who are you?" She flinched as if he had struck her. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. He could see the war raging inside her, the instinct to lie versus the terror of being caught. Before either could speak, the doors to the study burst open and Gryph, his head of household, rushed in, his face pale. "Alpha," he panted. "You need to come now. Urgent dispatch from the border." The moment was shattered, but the question remained, hanging between them like an executioner's blade, leaving a promise of a reckoning yet to come. The great hall was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. Cassian had been called away to deal with an urgent border dispute, leaving Lira with orders to wait in the study. But a summon from Lady Seraphina, delivered by a guard who made it clear it wasn't a request, had dragged her here. Now she stood in the middle of the hall, feeling 100 pairs of hostile eyes on her. This was a trap. She knew it in her bones. Seraphina stood near the central hearth, looking regal and smug. She held up a delicate silver chain, a beautiful brooch in the shape of a star glittering at its end. "My mother's star brooch," Seraphina announced, her voice carrying across the hushed hall. "It was a gift from my father. It went missing from my chambers this morning." She paused, letting the drama build before her cold blue eyes landed directly on Lira. "Just after she was seen delivering my laundry." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Whispers erupted. "The slave a thief." "I'm sure it was just a mistake," Seraphina said with a voice full of false sympathy. "She probably just saw something shiny and couldn't help herself. Creatures like her have no self-control." Her eyes narrowed. "Guards, search her." Panic, cold and sharp, seized Lira. This was it. This was how they would get rid of her. They would plant the brooch on her, and Cassian would have no choice. The law was clear. A slave caught stealing from a noble was to be executed. Her heart hammered against her ribs as 2 guards started towards her, their faces grim. There was no escape. "That won't be necessary." The voice cut through the hall like a whip crack. It was Cassian. He strode into the room, his face a thundercloud, his golden eyes blazing with fury. The guards froze in their tracks. The crowd parted for him like the sea before a storm. He didn't even look at Seraphina. He walked straight to Lira, stopping directly in front of her, creating a shield with his body. He was her protector. He was her defender. He was her king. He'd returned from the border meeting, his mood already foul, only to be told that Seraphina had summoned his slave to the great hall. A cold dread, followed by a hot, possessive rage, had propelled him there. He arrived just in time to hear the accusation. The audacity of it, the sheer blatant political maneuvering, was breathtaking. Seraphina wasn't just accusing a slave. She was publicly challenging him. She was testing his authority, trying to force his hand in front of the entire pack. He would not let her win. He would not let them touch her. He would not let them use her against him. He moved through the crowd, his focus entirely on the small, trembling figure in the center of the room. He saw the terror in her eyes, and it fueled his fury. He stood before her, a living wall between her and the wolves. Then he turned his head slowly, pinning Serafina with a look so cold it could freeze fire. "I was wondering where that went," he said, his voice deceptively calm. Serafina blinked, confused.
What?
"What are you talking about, Alpha?" "That brooch," Cassian said, nodding towards the piece in her hand. "I gave it to her this morning, a small token. She has my permission to be in my chambers, to handle my possessions, to accept my gifts." He let a dangerous smile touch his lips. "So, unless you are accusing me of stealing from your mother, I suggest you drop this now." The silence in the hall was absolute. The shock was a palpable thing. He had not only defended a slave, he had claimed her publicly as someone who received his favor. He had lied seamlessly and without hesitation to protect her. He had drawn a line in the sand for the entire pack to see. On one side stood tradition, the council, and the nobility. On the other side stood him and her. Serafina's face was a mask of stunned fury and humiliation. Without another word, she turned and swept from the room. Cassian looked down at the girl. Lira, he thought, deciding he would call her that in his own mind until she gave him her true name. She was staring up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock, confusion, and something else, something that looked dangerously like hope. He had just saved her life. But he knew with a sinking certainty that he had also just started a war. The doors of the study slammed shut, the sound echoing the thunder in his own chest. Alone at last, he paced the length of the room, a caged lion. He had lied. He had lied to his pack, to his council, to a noble-born daughter, all to protect a nameless slave. It was reckless. It was political suicide. And as the silence roared in his ears, he knew he would do it again in a single heartbeat. Because of that, he was in more danger than he had ever been in his life. She stood by the door where she had followed him, looking small and lost in the vastness of the room. The terror was still in her eyes, but underneath it there was a new light, a fragile, questioning hope. It made his wolf, the beast he kept so tightly leashed, want to tear down the walls of the keep and run with her to the mountains where no one could ever touch them. He stopped pacing and turned on her, his control snapping. "You see what you've done?" he growled, the words harsher than he intended. "You see the chaos you bring." She flinched, the hope in her eyes dying. I didn't ask for this, did I?" He stalked towards her. "You, with your defiant eyes and your warrior's instincts, you who knows battle strategy and carries herself like a queen. You are not a slave." "I am what you see," she shot back, her voice trembling but fierce. "A prisoner, nothing more." "Liar," he whispered, stopping just before her. The space between them crackled, thick with unspoken truths and a raw, undeniable energy. He could smell her fear, but underneath it was the scent of rain-washed herbs, the scent that was driving him mad. "You are more than this, and I will have the truth." He reached out, his hand gently touching the faint scar at her temple. Her breath hitched. Her skin was so soft, a stark contrast to the calloused hand of a warrior. Everything about her was a contradiction. His touch was fire. It seared a path from her temple straight to her soul. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, suffocating silence. He was so close. Too close. His golden eyes weren't angry anymore. They were dark, hungry, and full of a terrifying intensity that mirrored the chaos in her own heart. He had saved her. He had lied for her. He had stood against his entire court for her. Her mission, her vengeance, the ghosts of her family. It all felt so distant now, drowned out by the thunder of his presence. He thought she was a liar. But the real lie was the one she was telling herself. The lie that she felt nothing for him. "Tell me," he murmured, his voice a low, rough caress. "Tell me your name." "I can't." Her words were swallowed by his mouth on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision, a desperate, raw claiming that was full of all the anger, frustration, and undeniable need that had been building between them for weeks. It was the crash of a wave against the shore, the strike of lightning against a tree. She gasped, and he took the sound as an invitation, deepening the kiss, one hand tangling in her hair while the other held her fast. Her body moved on instinct. Her mind screamed, "No, he is the enemy." But her soul answered him. Her hands came up to grip his shoulders, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was spinning out of control. It was a surrender, a betrayal, and it was the most real thing she had ever felt. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily, their foreheads resting against each other. The world had tilted on its axis. The line between prisoner and captor, between enemy and something else, had just been burned away. The kiss changed everything. Their world became one of stolen moments and secret glances. A shared touch in a darkened corridor. A lingering look across a crowded room. A few precious, heart-stopping minutes alone in the stables. The scent of hay and horses mixing with the wild scent of him. It was a dangerous, intoxicating dance, and Lira found herself falling deeper with every secret smile, with every hushed word. She knew it was madness. She knew she was a lamb falling for the wolf, but she was powerless to stop it. Tonight, the stables felt different. There was a new urgency in his touch, a new desperation in his eyes. "This is insane," he murmured against her skin, his hands tangled in her hair, his body pressing her back against the rough wood of the stall. "I know," she breathed, her own desire a hot, pooling fire in her belly. "They are all watching," he continued, his voice a low growl. "Every minute, every second. Valerius, Seraphina, they are waiting for me to make a mistake." "And is this a mistake?" she asked, her voice trembling. He looked down at her, his golden eyes blazing in the dim lantern light. "Yes," he whispered. "It is the most dangerous mistake I have ever made." And then he kissed her again, slow and deep. A kiss that spoke of possession and a bone-deep need that terrified and thrilled her. Between one breath and the next, a shadow shifted in the stable doorway. Lyra's eyes fluttered open over Cassian's shoulder, and she saw her. Lady Seraphina, standing there, half hidden in the darkness, her face a perfect, chilling mask of triumph and pure hatred. The air turned to ice. Her blood ran cold. They were caught. He walked into the council chambers, knowing it was an ambush. The air was thick with a smug, predatory energy. He had felt Lira stiffen in his arms, had followed her terrified gaze to the shadows of the stable door. He had seen Seraphina's fleeting, triumphant smirk. And so he was ready. He took his seat at the head of the table, his face an unreadable mask of stone.
He let them speak.
Lord Valerius began, his voice smooth and reasonable, but his words were daggers. "Alpha," he began, "the pack is restless. There are whispers, rumors of an unwise attachment." "Get to the point, Valerius," Cassian said, his voice flat. Valerius's eyes hardened. "The point, Alpha, is that your distraction threatens us all. A true leader cannot be compromised. The pack requires a Luna, a noble-born wolf who can secure alliances and strengthen your reign, not a stray." Cassian said nothing. He just stared, letting the silence become a weapon. "You must cast the slave girl aside," another elder chimed in, emboldened by Valerius. "Banish her. Prove to the pack that your duty comes before your appetites." The demand hung in the air. This was it, the midpoint, the moment they had been building towards. They had moved beyond whispers and hallway confrontations. This was a formal, public challenge to his rule. They were telling him to choose, the pack or her, his throne or his heart. He looked at each of them, memorizing the greedy, ambitious gleam in their eyes. They thought they had him cornered. They thought they were using his own laws and traditions against him. He rose slowly from his seat, a predator unfolding to its full height. "This council is dismissed," he said, his voice a low, rumbling promise of the storm to come. "And you will not speak of this again." He turned and strode from the room, leaving them in stunned silence. He had refused their demand. He had chosen her. And as he walked through the cold stone corridors, he knew he had just signed both of their death warrants. He was gone. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. In the hours after the council meeting, Cassian became a ghost. He was cold, distant, his face a mask of stone. He wouldn't look at her. He wouldn't speak to her. When she brought him his meals, He dismissed her with a curt nod. The warmth, the fire, the man who had kissed her with such desperate passion in the stables had vanished. Her heart ached with a pain so sharp it stole her breath. She had been a fool, a stupid, naive fool. Her misbelief, the one she had held on to for so long, came crashing back with the force of a tidal wave. Love was a weakness. He had played with her, a momentary distraction. And now that his throne was threatened, he had discarded her. She was a toy being put back in its box. The realization was a cold, hard stone in the pit of her stomach. She had let her guard down, and this was her punishment. She was alone again. Pushing her away was the hardest thing he had ever done. Every time she entered the room, her eyes wide with a confusion and hurt that was like a knife in his gut. He had to fight every instinct in his body. His wolf howled in protest, clawing at him, demanding he go to her, comfort her, tell her the truth. But he couldn't. He had to be cruel to be kind. It was the only way he could think of to protect her. He knew his counsel. He had seen the look in Valerius's eyes. They had lost the political battle, which meant they would now move to a physical one. They would come for her. He was sure of it. By creating distance, by making it look like he had cast her aside as they demanded, he hoped to make her less of a target. He hoped they would believe they had won, buying him time to figure out their next move. It was a desperate gamble, and it was tearing him apart. He sat in his study, staring into the fire, feeling the weight of his crown like never before. He was surrounded by enemies, and the only person in the world he trusted was the one he was forced to wound with his silence. What was worse, he didn't know how long he could keep it up. How long could he watch her pain before he shattered? Meanwhile, in a secret chamber deep within the keep, Lord Valerius stood before a small, select group of his most trusted council members. Lady Seraphina was at his side, her face cold and hard as a diamond. "He will not bend," Valerius said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "His obsession with the slave girl has made him a liability. He is compromised. He defied us. He chose her over his pack," another elder hissed. "Then the choice is made for us," Valerius said. The decision had already been reached. This was merely the confirmation. A threat to the pack's stability must be removed. Both of them. Seraphina smiled, a cruel, thin curve of her lips.
How?
"We will not be the ones to strike," Valerius explained, his plan already perfectly formed. "He has made enemies. There are whispers of assassins for hire in the borderlands. Men who leave no trace." He looked at the faces around him. "We will arrange an attack during the next hunt. A tragedy. He will be ambushed. Taken. And the evidence?" "The evidence," Valerius continued, his voice dripping with triumphant malice, "will show that his pet slave, the last heir of a rival pack he helped conquer, orchestrated the entire thing out of revenge." The sheer, brilliant cruelty of the plan settled over the room. They would not just kill him, they would destroy his honor and use the woman he loved as the instrument of his downfall. Valerius raised his glass. To the future of the pack. The others raised their glasses in unison. "Hire the assassins," he commanded his lieutenant. "It's time to end this." The night of the great hunt was a cold, formal affair. A massive bonfire roared in the central courtyard, casting flickering shadows on the faces of the pack, and every face seemed to hold a hint of smugness, of pity, whenever they looked at her. The whispers had been relentless since the council meeting. He's finally put the stray in her place. Lira stood in the shadows, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Cassian's distance was a physical pain, a constant, silent rejection that affirmed all her worst fears. Her goal for the night was simple: survive it without letting them see her break. Lady Seraphina was preening by the fire, dressed in magnificent hunting leathers, a silver bow in her hand. She was laughing, surrounded by her friends, fully expecting to be given the rider's honor, the spot at the Alpha's side. She looked over at Lira and gave her a slow, triumphant smile. "I won," the smile said. Then he appeared. Cassian emerged from the keep, and a hush fell over the courtyard. He was a vision of dark power, his golden eyes sweeping over the crowd. He walked past the elders. He walked past the pack's greatest warriors. He walked right past Seraphina, whose smile faltered and froze on her face. He walked straight to Lira. The world seemed to hold its breath. He stopped in front of her, the heat from his body reaching out to warm the chill in her bones. He held out a hand, and in it was a bow. It wasn't silver and ornate like Seraphina's. Rather, it was dark hue, simple, elegant, and perfectly balanced. It was a warrior's weapon. "You ride with me," he said, his voice a low command that was for her alone. Yet, it echoed in the dead silence of the courtyard. Her breath caught, her thoughts spun. This wasn't a trick. This was a declaration. In front of everyone who had mocked her, in front of the council that had condemned him, he was choosing her. Before the words left her lips, her hand reached out, her fingers brushing his as she took the bow. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The broken, grieving girl receded, and the daughter of an alpha, the girl her father had trained, stood in her place. He could not stand it another second, the sight of her so alone and wounded in the shadows. The smug, triumphant faces of his council, who thought they had beaten him into submission. The lie he was living was choking him, and his wolf was tearing him apart from the inside. He had made a choice in that council room.
It was time to stand by it.
So he walked. Every step was a defiance. Every meter he crossed was a severing of a political tie. He felt Valerius's glare like a physical weight on his back. He saw Seraphina's shock curdle into pure, venomous rage. He ignored it all. The only thing that mattered was the look in her eyes when he stopped before her. He saw the flicker of hope she tried so desperately to hide. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that he had made the right choice. He would rather face 1,000 enemies with her at his side than sit on a throne of lies without her. This was his point of no return. As her fingers took the bow, he felt the spark, the current that always arced between them. He mounted his great black stallion in one fluid motion and held a hand down to her. "Tonight," he said, his voice low and firm, "you are no one's slave." She took his hand, and he pulled her up to sit in front of him. Her back was pressed against his chest, small and strong. As they rode out of the courtyard at the head of the hunting party, leaving a sea of stunned and furious wolves in their wake, he saw Valerius give a subtle, almost invisible nod to a guard at the edge of the crowd. The trap was set. He knew it. Instead of fear, he felt a strange, wild exhilaration. Let them come. He was finally done hiding. The forest was a world of silver and shadows. Moonlight streamed through the canopy, painting the ground in shifting patterns. Cassian had guided them away from the main hunting party, down a lesser-known game trail. Here, alone with him, the silence was not empty, but full of a powerful, unspoken connection. The warmth of his chest was a solid wall at her back, his arms a protective cage around her. Her heart, which had been frozen for days, was finally starting to thaw. "They will not forgive this," she whispered, the words carried away by the wind. "Let them try," he rumbled, his voice a vibration against her spine. Without warning, the world exploded. An arrow hissed past her ear, burying itself in the tree beside them with a solid thunk. Their horse reared, screaming. Cassian pulled them from the saddle in a single fluid motion, landing crouched on the forest floor, pushing her behind him. Shadows detached themselves from the trees. 5 of them. No, 6 men dressed in black, their faces hidden, blades glinting in the moonlight. "Assassins," Cassian growled, and the sound was no longer entirely human. His body shifted, muscles bunching and twisting. He grew larger, his clothes straining. But the change was cut short as 2 more arrows tipped with something that glowed with a sickly purple light slammed into his shoulder. He roared in pain and rage, stumbling back a step. "Wolfsbane," he snarled, trying to fight the poison's drag. Her body moved on instinct. There was no time for fear. She knocked an arrow in the bow he had given her, her movement swift and sure, a dance she had learned long ago. He was the shield. She was the spear. He lunged, a blur of fury, his hands now tipped with thick black claws, and she let her first arrow fly. It struck an assassin in the throat. He dropped without a sound. They fought back to back, a whirlwind of desperate, deadly motion. He was a storm of claws and teeth. She was a whisper of death from the string. They moved as one soul, one heart, one will to survive. As he tore into one attacker, another raised a crossbow, aiming for his exposed back. "Cassian!" she screamed. Before the word left her lips, she had already spun and fired. The arrow took the man in the eye. He turned, his golden eyes blazing, and in that moment, she felt it etched in fire. A connection, a golden thread of light snapped taut between their souls. It was a jolt of pure energy, a shockwave of feeling. She felt his pain from the wolfsbane, his burning rage, his fierce, overwhelming protectiveness of her. It was a bond, real, powerful, unbreakable. The pain was a fire in his veins, the wolfsbane trying to drag his wolf back into its cage. But the sight of her, fighting at his side with the grace and fury of a valkyrie, gave him strength. She was magnificent. She was everything he had ever dreamed of. She was his. When she screamed his name, he felt a surge of her terror a split second before he saw the threat. Then he heard the thud of the arrow finding its mark and knew she had saved him. The moment she did, the world shifted as if fate demanded it. The bond he had felt as a faint pull, as a primal urge, now ignited. It roared to life, a conduit of pure power and emotion between them. He felt her determination, her fear for him, her loyalty, and he pushed his own strength, his own conviction back down the bond to her. Mine, his soul roared. Mine to protect. Fueled by this new, shared strength, he fought with the power of two wolves. He tore through the remaining assassins until only one was left, cowering on the ground, a broken arm dangling at his side. The immediate threat was over. He stood panting, the wolfsbane a dull ache now instead of a fire, and looked at her. Her face was smudged with dirt, her knuckles white on the bow, but her eyes shone with a fierce light. They had survived, and they were no longer just an alpha and a slave. They were mates. The truth of it settled in his bones, absolute and unshakable. He took a step towards her, 1,000 words caught in his throat. But then the forest came alive again.
It wasn't just a few shadows this time.
At least a dozen more assassins melted from the trees, surrounding them. A silent, deadly circle. This hadn't been the main attack. This had been the bait. Despair was a cold, bitter taste in his mouth. He looked at the ring of enemies, then back at Lira. There were too many.
He was wounded.
The wolfsbane slowing him, dulling his senses. He could fight. He could die. But he couldn't protect her. They came for him first. They carried heavy chains, the links glowing with the same sickly purple light as the arrowheads. Wolfsbane. They wanted him alive. "Run," he roared at her, a desperate, guttural command. He lunged, not at the assassins, but towards her, trying to shove her towards the dark safety of the woods. But she didn't run. She stood her ground, knocking another arrow, her face pale but determined. "No," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Not without you." The chains. They burned. They wrapped around his arms, his legs, his chest. Each touch an agony that felt like his skin was being peeled from his bones. His wolf screamed, trapped and powerless inside him. He fought, thrashing against the bonds, but his strength was fading fast. Darkness crept at the edges of his vision as they dragged him down to his knees. His last conscious sight was of Lira, fighting like a cornered lioness before she was finally overwhelmed and seized. "No," she screamed, fighting against the rough hands that gripped her. "Cassian." She watched, helpless as they chained him, as the proud, powerful Alpha was brought low. Her heart shattered into a million pieces. She had just found him, had just felt the incredible, beautiful truth of their bond, and now she was losing him. Just as he collapsed, another group of figures appeared through the trees. It wasn't more assassins. It was the Alpha's personal guard, and they were being led by Lord Valerius. Treachery. Valerius bellowed, his face a mask of false horror as he took in the scene. He looked at the bodies of the dead assassins, at the captured Alpha, and finally his cold, reptilian eyes landed on her. What is the meaning of this? They ambushed us, she cried, struggling against her captors. It was a trap. A trap indeed, Valerius said smoothly. He knelt beside one of the assassins she had shot through the eye. He reached into the man's tunic and pulled out a folded, sealed piece of parchment. But I fear you are the one who said it. He broke the seal and began to read aloud, his voice ringing with righteous fury. The Alpha will ride the northern trail. Isolate him. Take him alive, as we discussed. My payment will be his crown. Signed, the last heir of the Blackwood pack. The words hung in the air. A venomous lie. The blood drained from her face. Blackwood. They knew who she was. Valerius looked directly at her, his eyes glittering with triumph. Seize the traitor, he commanded the guards. She orchestrated this assassination attempt against our Alpha to avenge her fallen pack. Let all here bear witness to her treason. The guards ripped her bow from her hands and bound her wrists. The assassins who had captured Cassian simply melted back into the forest, their job complete. It had all been a performance, a perfectly executed plan. As they dragged her away and a different set of men tended to the captured, unconscious form of her mate, she looked at Valerius's smug face. She had walked into their trap, and it had just slammed shut. The cold. That was the first thing she registered, the biting, soul-deep cold of the dungeon, a place she was beginning to think of as her grave. They had stripped her of the fine bow, of the Alpha's favor, and thrown her back into the darkness. The golden thread of the bond she had felt with Cassian was now a source of agony, a connection to a man who was captured, perhaps even dead. Despair was a heavy, suffocating blanket. What was the point of surviving the assassins only to rot in a cage? Footsteps echoed, light and feminine, not a guard. A figure appeared at the bars of her cell, holding a lantern. The light illuminated a face of perfect, cold beauty. Lady Seraphina. I thought I would visit you one last time, Seraphina said, her voice like the chime of a funeral bell. Before the end. Lira stared back, saying nothing. She would not give her the satisfaction. You really thought you could win, didn't you? Seraphina laughed, a soft, cruel sound. You, a piece of filth and rags. Did you truly believe he would choose you over his pack? Over his duty? She leaned closer, her blue eyes glittering with malice. We knew who you were for weeks. The last little pup of the Blackwood pack. We were just waiting for the perfect moment to use it. The words were a physical blow. They hadn't just discovered her identity. They had cultivated it like a weapon. It was the perfect story, because it was true, Seraphina whispered, savoring every word. You are the last of the Blackwoods. Who wouldn't believe you'd seek revenge? You played your part so beautifully. She smiled. Cassian will be back. And when we show him the proof of your betrayal, he will break. And I will be there to piece him back together. With a final, triumphant glance, she turned and walked away, her laughter echoing in the darkness, leaving Lira utterly and completely alone with the ruins of her life.
Pain.
It was the first thing that broke through the fog. A burning, agonizing fire that centered on the wolfsbane chains still locked around his wrists. He awoke with a gasp, his lungs screaming for air. He was in a dark, damp cabin alone. Memory returned in jarring, fractured pieces. The hunt, the kiss, the ambush, the bond igniting between them. A flash of golden light in his soul.
Lira.
And then the other memories. The chains, the accusation, treason. His mind was a battlefield. His wolf, weakened but alive, held a single desperate truth in the back of his mind.
Mate. Ours.
Innocent. But the poison of the wolfsbane and the poison of Valerius's words twisted together, creating a fog of doubt and confusion. How could she have saved his life only to have planned his death? The logic fought with the instinct, tearing him in two. He had to get back. He had to know the truth. A surge of pure primal rage gave him strength. He roared, a sound of pure agony and fury, and pulled against the chains. He felt the muscles in his back and shoulders tear. His bones groaned in protest. The wolfsbane-laced iron seared his flesh. But he ignored it. With a final, explosive surge of power, the chain snapped, the links flying apart like shrapnel. He staggered to his feet, breathing heavily, his body a canvas of pain. But one thought burned through the fog clearer than anything else. He had to find her. He stormed through the gates of his own keep like a vengeful spirit. Warriors and servants alike scrambled out of his path, their eyes wide with shock and fear at the sight of him, bloodied, bruised, with the remnants of a shattered chain still dangling from one wrist. He wasn't thinking. He was moving on pure, raw instinct, a hurricane of rage and confusion. He needed to see her. He needed to look in her eyes and see the truth for himself. But they were waiting for him. Lord Valerius and the entire council met him in the main hall, blocking his path. Their faces were masks of grave concern. It was a perfectly staged welcome. "Alpha, you're alive," Valerius cried, his voice full of false relief. "We feared the worst." "Where is she?" Cassian growled, trying to push past them. "She is secure," Valerius said, placing a firm, placating hand on his chest. "Cassian, you must listen. We have learned everything." They didn't give him a moment to breathe. They assailed him, a pack of wolves circling their wounded king. They bombarded him with their poisoned truth. The letter was shoved into his hand. A guard gave a faked, tearful testimony of seeing Lira meeting with a hooded figure near the woods days earlier. They unrolled a map of the territory, supposedly found hidden in her cot, with his hunting route marked out. It was her motive all along, an elder said, his voice dripping with pity. The daughter of the Blackwood Alpha come to finish what her father started. Every word was a hammer blow. Every piece of evidence was a nail driving into his heart. His wolf was screaming, a frantic, desperate howl of denial in the back of his mind.
Lies.
"She is ours. She fought for us."
Lies.
But his logical mind, the part of him that had been trained since birth to fear betrayal, to see plots in every shadow, was being overwhelmed. His greatest fear, being played for a fool, being seen as weak and manipulated like his father, was being realized in the most horrific way imaginable. The pain of the betrayal was so immense, so soul-shattering, that it began to curdle. The grief, the confusion, the love, it all twisted together and became something else, a cold, black, empty rage. He looked at the letter, at the map, at the sorrowful faces of the men who had advised him his entire life. It was a perfect airtight case, and it broke him. She heard the commotion from her cell, a roar of fury that could only belong to one person. Cassian. He was back. He was alive. A fragile, desperate hope bloomed in her chest, a tiny wild flower pushing its way through cracked stone. He was alive. He would know it was a lie. The bond they shared. He would feel her innocence through it. He would tear this place apart to get to her. He would save her. She gripped the bars of her cell, her knuckles white, and listened. She waited for the sound of his footsteps, for his roar to call her name. But the roar faded, and the footsteps never came. Instead, hours later, the heavy bolt on her own cell door was thrown back. The guards didn't look at her. Their faces were grim. "The Alpha summons you," one of them said, his voice flat. "To the courtyard." Hope died, and a cold, terrible dread took its place. Not the throne room, not his study. The courtyard, where public sentences were carried out. They dragged her out into the cold light of day. The entire pack was gathered in the central courtyard, their faces a sea of grim, accusing stares. In the center of the yard, there was a large flat stone, an executioner's block. Her blood ran cold.
No.
She searched the crowd, her heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm. And then she saw him. He emerged from the keep, and the crowd parted before him. It was Cassian. But it wasn't. The man who walked towards her was a stranger. His face was a chiseled mask of ice, and his golden eyes, the eyes she had dreamed of, were empty, dead. There was no fire, no warmth, no recognition. There was nothing. This was her all-is-lost moment.
He believed them.
He didn't speak to the guards. He came directly to her and grabbed her arm. His grip was like iron, brutal and impersonal. There was no spark, no warmth. The golden thread of their bond felt severed, muted by the sheer force of his cold fury. He dragged her through the silent crowd towards the stone block. He shoved her forward, forcing her to her knees. "We are a pack of laws," he said, his voice flat and dead, carrying across the silent courtyard. "And the highest law is loyalty. We were betrayed from within." He looked down at her, but it was like looking at a stranger. This slave, the last daughter of the Blackwood pack, used her position to conspire with our enemies. She planned my assassination to avenge her family. He saw the traitor.
He saw the assassin.
He did not see the woman he loved. He was moving through a black, empty void. His heart was a gaping wound in his chest, and the only thing that filled the hole was a cold, silent rage. This was his duty, to cut out the rot, to purge the poison, to kill the woman who had shattered his soul. It was a form of suicide. He was executing the best part of himself, but he believed it was the only way to survive. His wolf was silent, a dead weight in his mind, crushed by the Alpha's absolute, unwavering pain. He drew the ceremonial executioner's blade from the sheath on his back. The silver gleamed in the cold sunlight, heavy and final in his hands. He saw her kneeling there, her head held high, her back straight. A part of him screamed for her to beg, to cry, to confess. It would have made it easier, but she did none of those things. She just looked up at him, her eyes clear and full of a sorrow so profound it almost brought him to his knees. He raised the blade high. The crowd gasped. He saw Valerius in the front row, his face a perfect mask of solemn duty. He saw Seraphina, a faint triumphant smirk on her lips. He saw the faces of his pack, waiting for him to prove his strength, to prove he was not a fool. He locked his gaze with hers one last time, preparing to strike. This was the end. The silver blade hung in the air, a sliver of moonlight promising death. This was it, the end. She closed her eyes, not in fear, but in a strange, hollow resignation. She had fought and she had lost. Her only regret was the look in his eyes, that dead, empty void where a fire used to be. So she spoke, not a plea, but a final, defiant truth. Her voice a whisper that was for him alone in the crushing silence. "If killing me proves your strength, then do it," she breathed, her gaze locked with his. "But if you ever believed I wanted you dead, then you never knew me at all." His name hung in the air, a ghost between them. She saw a flicker, a tremor in the hand that held the blade, a crack in the icy mask of his face. The executioner was hesitating. The crowd murmured, sensing the shift. And then chaos. A shout, a commotion. The crowd parted. "Alpha, wait." A voice roared, full of desperation. A warrior, his face grimed with dirt and blood, burst into the courtyard. It was Cassian, one of Cassian's most loyal captains. And he was dragging a half-conscious, broken figure behind him. It was one of the assassins from the forest, the one they had captured alive. He woke up. "Alpha," Cassian panted, shoving the prisoner forward. He talked. "You need to hear this. Then you never knew me at all." Her whisper was not a plea for mercy. It was a judgment, and it struck him with the force of a physical blow, a shard of truth that pierced through the black, empty rage. It was the echo of his own wolf's frantic, silenced howls. "You know her. You know her soul." His arm trembled. The blade felt impossibly heavy. Doubt, a terrifying, agonizing poison, seeped into the wounds of his certainty. And in that single heartbeat of hesitation, the world broke open. Cassian's shout was a lifeline in a drowning sea. Cassian's head snapped up, his eyes locked on the prisoner. The living, breathing proof from the forest ambush, the piece of the puzzle that his counsel had conveniently forgotten to mention. Hope. A terrible and savage thing clawed its way back into his chest. He lowered the blade just an inch, his entire being focused now on the new arrival. He saw the flash of pure terror on Lord Valerius's face. He saw Seraphina's triumphant smirk vanish, replaced by a flicker of panic. They were afraid. In the span of a breath, his goal shifted. It was no longer to deliver a sentence. It was to find the truth, no matter how much it destroyed him. He strode from the executioner's block, leaving a stunned Lira kneeling in his wake, and crossed the courtyard. The crowd shrank back from the look on his face. He had been a storm of cold grief before. Now he was something far more dangerous. He was an alpha with a scent of doubt in the air. He didn't waste time with questions. He grabbed the front of the assassin's tunic, hauling the man to his feet. The executioner's blade meant for Lira was now pressed against the soft flesh of the prisoner's throat. "You have one chance," Cassian growled, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "Talk, or you'll die screaming." The assassin, his eyes wide with terror, started babbling, the words tumbling over each other in a desperate, pathetic rush. It was the council. All of it, he choked out, his gaze flickering towards the nobles. "Lord Valerius, he hired us. He paid us in gold to stage the attack." A gasp rippled through the assembled pack. Cassian's grip tightened, his knuckles white. "The letter," he demanded, his voice dangerously soft. "Forged," the man shrieked. "Valerius gave it to our leader. He said to plan it if we were caught. He said the girl's history made her the perfect scapegoat. He said the plan was to get you out of the way too, to put a new alpha on the throne, one the council could control." Every word was a nail, crucifying the lie he had been fed. Every syllable was a drop of acid, burning away the rage he had aimed at her, revealing the raw, gaping wound of his own failure beneath. The letter a lie. The motive a lie. Her betrayal. All of it a lie. He had been played, a puppet, just like his father. The fury that filled him now was nothing like the cold, dead rage from before. This was a white-hot inferno. It was the rage of a mate who had almost murdered his other half. It was the rage of a king who had just seen the nest of vipers coiled around the heart of his pack. She watched from the ground, her body trembling, her mind reeling. The truth.
It was all coming out.
A flood of poison being drawn from a wound. Every word the assassin spoke was a piece of her shattered world clicking back into place. She wasn't a traitor. She wasn't an assassin. She wasn't the monster they had painted her to be. A dizzying, overwhelming wave of relief washed over her, so powerful it almost made her faint. She looked at the council members. Lord Valerius was ashen-faced. Seraphina was shaking her head, whispering, "No, no, no," under her breath. They were caught. Then she looked at Cassian. He was still for a long moment, the assassin's confession hanging in the silent air, and she saw the change. She saw the precise moment the truth settled in his soul. The deadness in his eyes was gone. In its place was a fire so bright, so absolute it was terrifying to behold. It was the fire of a star being born or a world being destroyed, and it was no longer aimed at her. He let the assassin drop to the ground, his confession hanging in the air like a death sentence. The full weight of his catastrophic mistake crashed down on him. He had dragged her from a cell. He had called her a traitor in front of their people. He had raised a blade to her throat. He had almost killed the only pure and loyal thing in his life, all because he had listened to the whispers of snakes instead of the beating of his own heart. The pain of his failure was an agony beyond imagining. But beneath it, his rage found its true north. His rage was no longer for the woman at his feet. His fury was no longer for the phantom of betrayal. His wrath was now for the vipers in his own nest. His internal conflict was over. His wolf, silent for so long, now rose up, howling, not in grief, but for blood, for justice, for the traitors who had dared to touch his mate. With a deliberate, almost serene calm, he let the executioner's blade fall from his hand. The sword fell. It clattered on the stone courtyard, the sound of final ringing note that signaled the end of one battle and the beginning of another.
He turned.
He faced his counsel. His eyes promised death. She watched him drop the sword, watched him turn away from her, his back a rigid line of purpose. He didn't look at her, didn't offer a word of apology. Not yet. There was no time. She saw the look on his face, as he turned towards Lord Valerius and the others. The Alpha they had tried to control was gone. The man who had been blinded by doubt was gone. In his place stood a king, a predator, an executioner who had finally found his true targets. She saw Lord Valerius take an involuntary step back. She saw the terror dawn on Serafina's face. They knew what was coming. The entire pack knew the storm had found its eye, and the reckoning had begun. He moved. There was no thought, no hesitation, only the cold, clean certainty of purpose. Lord Valerius, seeing the fire in his eyes, tried to retreat into the law, his voice a desperate, greedy thing. "This is madness, Alpha. The law demands a trial. You cannot." "I am the law," Cassian snarled, the sound a promise of death. He closed the distance in 3 long strides. Valerius reached for a hidden blade, his final pathetic act of defiance. It was useless. Cassian's hand shot out, catching the older wolf's wrist with a sickening crack of bone. The dagger clattered to the stones. He looked into the traitor's terrified eyes, and he felt nothing. No pity, no remorse, only the grim satisfaction of justice. He moved. A flash of steel from his own boot knife. It was done. A collective scream went through the crowd as Valerius fell. The other council members tried to scatter, but the pack, loyal to their true Alpha, formed a living wall, trapping them. He went from one to the next, a specter of righteous fury, his justice swift and absolute. There were no trials for traitors who threatened the heart of the pack. There was only the purge. Finally, only Serafina was left sobbing on the ground, her fine clothes stained with dust. "No, please, Alpha. I beg you," she cried, crawling towards him. "I did it for you, for the pack." He looked down at her, his face a mask of cold contempt. "You did it for power, and now you will have none." He sheathed his blade. Death was too quick a mercy for her. "You are stripped of your name. Your lands are forfeit to the pack. You are exiled." He leaned down, his voice a chilling whisper for her alone. "You will leave with nothing but the clothes on your back. And if you are ever seen in these lands again, my wolves will hunt you for sport." He turned his back on her, leaving her to the silence of her living death. She watched the brutal, bloody justice unfold from her place on the ground. It was terrifying. It was violent. And it was the end of the nightmare that had started with her own family's murder. The same rot, the same ambition, the same poison that had destroyed her pack had been purged from this one. The climax was over. The courtyard was silent, save for the weeping of the exiled Serafina. The pack stood in shocked, awed stillness. And then Cassian, his hands and face streaked with the blood of his enemies, turned. He walked back towards her, his golden eyes no longer empty, but filled with a storm of emotions she could not begin to name. He walked through the carnage he had wrought, and he did not stop until he was standing before her. She didn't know what to expect. A command, an order, an apology. What he did next shocked the entire pack to its core. He knelt. The Alpha King, the executioner, the victor, knelt in the blood and the dirt before her. Before the slave girl he had almost killed. The entire world seemed to stop, to hold its breath. He knelt before her, ignoring the collective gasp of his pack. His failure had been public. His atonement had to be the same. He looked at the chains on her wrists, the symbol of his blindness, of his unforgivable mistake. With his own hands, he reached out and, with a surge of strength, shattered the iron links. The sound of the chains breaking echoed in the silent courtyard. He stayed on his knees, looking up at her, letting her see all the guilt, all the self-loathing, all the agonizing love in his eyes. "Lira," he said, her true name a prayer on his lips. "Can you ever forgive me?" He didn't wait for an answer. He rose gently, taking her hands and pulling her to her feet. Then he turned to face the sea of watching wolves, his voice ringing with a power and clarity that no one would ever question again. "There are no more lies," he roared. "This is Lira of the Blackwood Pack, daughter of Alpha Yorick, the last of her line." He saw the shock, the understanding dawn on their faces. The council destroyed her pack and hid their treason for years, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. She came here as a prisoner, but she stood with the heart of a queen. He looked at her, his mate, his equal. Before anyone could speak, he gently took her chin in his hand, and with the blood of his enemies still on his thumb, he drew a single, deliberate mark on her forehead. An anointing, a coronation. She is the survivor of the Blackwood fire, he declared, his voice dropping to a low, possessive growl. And she is your Luna. His Luna. The words washed over her, a wave of impossible, breathtaking truth. She felt the warmth of his thumb on her skin, a mark of blood that felt more sacred than any crown. He had knelt for her. He had shattered her chains. He had given her back her name and her station. In front of everyone, he had chosen her, not as a prize, but as a partner. She looked out at the faces of the pack, no longer hostile, but full of awe and a dawning respect. They were not just looking at a slave anymore. They were looking at their queen. The tears she had refused to shed in the dungeon, at the executioner's block, now fell freely, silent trails of grief, relief, and a love so fierce it ached. She was not just an Alpha's mate. She was her mate. He was not just a king. He was her king. He led her away from the courtyard, away from the bodies and the blood, his hand holding hers in a grip that was both gentle and unbreakable. He led her back towards the keep, towards his chambers, towards their home. The public story was over, but their own had just begun. The heavy oak door of his chamber closed, shutting out the rest of the world. The silence inside was profound, a stark contrast to the chaos of the last few hours. The adrenaline was gone now, leaving behind only the raw, aching truth of what they had endured. He stood across the room from her, his shoulders slumped, the weight of his actions finally settling on him. "I can't," he began, his voice breaking, rough with a pain that tore at her heart. "Lira, I can't ask you to forgive me what I did." "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling. He finally looked at her, his golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I saw the proof, and I chose to believe a lie because I was a coward. I was so afraid of being weak, of being my father, that I became a monster." He took a shaky step closer. "I raised the blade. Lira, I almost—" "But you didn't," she cut him off, her own voice gaining strength. She crossed the room, stopping just before him, and raised a hand to his face. He flinched as if expecting a blow, but she simply rested her palm against his cheek. "I saw your eyes, Cassian. Even in the end, I saw the man I knew was in there." She took a deep breath, confessing her own truth. "That last moment, I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of you dying, believing I had betrayed you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I would rather have died by your hand than have lived as their pawn." Her words were both a final, twisting knife of guilt and the purest absolution he had ever known. She had seen the good in him even when he was at his absolute worst. She had loved him even as he was prepared to kill her. The sheer, unconditional power of her heart shattered the last of his defenses. A choked sob escaped him, and he pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her scent as if it were the only air in the world. "I don't deserve you," he choked out, his body shaking with the force of his release. "You're wrong," she murmured against his chest, her arms wrapping around him, holding him together. "We deserve each other. We both survived." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. He saw no fear in her eyes, no hatred, only a deep, resilient love that mirrored his own. The bond between them, muted by his rage, now flared to life, a current of warmth, relief, and a fierce, possessive joy. He was not just an alpha, he was her mate. She was not just a survivor. She was his queen. Without another word, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the stables. This was a kiss of reverence, of healing. It was a promise of 1,000 sunrises, a vow to spend the rest of his life being the man she had believed he was, even when he had a blade to her throat. It was the sealing of their bond, the end of a nightmare, and the very first breath of their forever. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, drop your thoughts, and subscribe to my channel for more werewolf romance stories because I can't wait to see you on the next one.